Hello, welcome to another video, and today I'm going to be talking about just one particular exercise, being this external rotation of the shoulder. There's obviously more versions, some side lying dumbbell ones, also the one with the shoulder abducted, but obviously most of the time people are using these are for rotator cuff strengthening, either to rehabilitate an injury or to prevent one. So I'm going to discuss the value of using these and where it's possibly overused, or not possibly, but usually is overused at the extent of other things that should be done first, or even in replacing this as an exercise entirely. Alright, so firstly, I don't know how many people have been given this exercise if they go see a physiotherapist or even a trainer or just anyone. It's usually the go-to exercise for every shoulder injury seen. You know, it's like the one size fits all. It's like, okay, everyone must have weak external rotators that need to be strengthened with these type of exercises. But and what I'll show you is that not only is that not true, that in many cases these type of exercises will exacerbate the problems. So this is the question that I'm sort of posing in this video, really, is do people really does every single person have a weakness at this area? And the rotator cuff muscles, if you're not sure of what they are, there's 4 of them. The subscapularis is the internal rotator, and the other 3 are external rotators. The subscap is at the front here, and the other 3 are really around the side and towards the back of the shoulder as such. Alright, so there's sort of like a 3 versus 1 in terms of external versus internal. We've got to bear in mind the big powerful muscles that are involved that aren't rotator cuff, like pecs and lats, are internal rotators, and all the rhomboids and middle traps, all those guys are external rotators. So there's a real big interaction and big play between the big ones and the small ones. But just to conclude that the rotator cuff muscles only function is to do these type of things, really misses what their true function is, and really ignores the constant balancing act between mobility and stability of the shoulder, because we've got to understand that the shoulder is such a dynamic part of the body, and it really is nothing like it, and because of its uniqueness, it's able to do some incredible things. And as I've highlighted here, there's 1,600 different positions they've found that it can obtain. So unfortunately, this unique aspect of it, and its ability to create a dynamic mobility that sort of has some stability with extreme ranges of movement, comes at a huge price. All right, so if it's not carefully looked after, and this constant balancing act between finding extreme ranges of movement but maintaining stability, you're always going to be exposed to a potential injury and health problem that can, really escalate to something bad pretty quickly. So in terms of the rotator cuff, so the rotator cuff is, as we've explained with the muscles before, and here's another picture here that you can look at. The rotator cuff muscles, that even though they have their specific function to move the shoulder in a certain direction, their main role is to ensure that the humeral head is centered within the socket, basically centered in the middle, which is what they call centration. So these 4 muscles are really working together to provide this centration in every single movement we make with our arm, not just these external like throwing action type things that you see with the serving, and which is why most people will come to these, because what they think that it's the only thing it does. Where really every time we move our arm in any direction at all, even just to pick up a cup of coffee, these rotator cuff muscles are playing a really important role in keeping this humeral head centered right within the socket here, so that it can move freely without scuffing and tearing things. So the most complicated part of the shoulder things is that you can never ignore its interaction with so many of the other joints and muscles that are contributing, especially the scapula itself, which as you can see from this picture, we don't even see the scapula, but it's hiding behind these muscles here. But muscles like serratus anterior and lower trapezius, they're playing a really critical role in the function of the scapula, and also thoracic spine mobility. If we don't have that, then the thorax is rigid and stiff, and there's no way you'll be able to control anything with the scapula or the glenohumeral joint. So there's sort of like a really big powerful play between all of these things together. So to conclude that for a rotator cuff tear, or just to protect your shoulder, that all you need to do is this stuff, is really ignoring all of these things that we've just quickly discussed. So as I spoke just quickly then, as we raise our arm up and down, the rotator cuff works together as a group to keep it in the center. So if we lose that centration, we'll get some extra mobility of the humeral head, which sounds like a good thing, but that's not, because when it starts to move around too much, that's when it starts to pinch things, and especially the supraspinatus tendon is one that's going to really cop it, because it has a very small amount of space at the tip of the acromion there. So once you start constantly moving, you don't need to be lifting anything heavy, you just need to be moving your arm. This is why people with shoulder injuries find it really hard to just put their t-shirt on, or women to put their bras on, and just to do the simplest of tasks. Every time you move your arm to a certain degree, you start pinching and wearing that tendon. All right, and then once it sort of gets to a real chronic point, then the inflammation is there for a long time, and it takes a long time to get out of it. So why do people think that, if I know this, and a lot of therapists should know this as well, why do people use the external rotator? Why is it the first thing they think of to go straight to it when there's so many other things that they should be looking at? Well, the thinking is that if the humeral head's moving forward, which often it is, they're thinking, well, the external rotators pull it back, so if we make it stronger, it pulls it back into the center. Unfortunately, it's nowhere near that simple, and as I've sort of alluded to a few times already, these type of exercises actually will make things, exacerbate things, and actually really amplify it to another level. So firstly, there's a couple of things that you need to understand. The external rotation, so these exercises here are really reliant on a scapular retraction to be used at exactly the right time for you to do it correctly. Without the scapular retraction kicking in combination with that, all you will do is just create more problems, and you'll definitely create short and tight external rotators, which will create trigger points. So this is where it's telling you that really the problem that you have is not necessarily the weakness in the external rotators, but it's probably scapular retraction or scapular retraining. Scapular retraction is only one part, because you also need upward rotation. So really my point here is that the pain that you're experiencing, or the weakness in those external rotators, is a reaction from poor scapular movement. So when we're doing a bent over row exercises, as shown here, scapular retraction is a big part of this as well. So the external rotators are working quite heavily, but in combination with scapular retraction. Now, if you don't provide scapular retraction at the right time, either too late or too early, or you have too much weight, you don't do it right, then you're actually going to develop short and tight external rotators. So doing strengthening things like this will actually make them shorter and tighter, and give you even more problems, and won't help you at all. The second thing, so this is where it comes to now. So to know when you've got like stiffness, is where this is an impingement test that I often use with clients to determine if there's an impingement at that supraspinatus tendon, and usually the correction is not to go and strengthen it, but actually to go and weaken it, to actually release the trigger points and give back the mobility to this shoulder so it can centrate itself, because these short and tight rotators are actually ruining your ability to center the humeral head back into the socket. And in this case, the loosening is preferred over strengthening. So it's the exact opposite. So this type of exercise here is the exact opposite of this. But you will find in many cases that this is going to provide instant relief, and will allow you to then do the exercises that you really need to do, which will be really to do with scapular retraining, as opposed to just trying to tighten up external rotators with these type of things. All right, so A big part that often comes in combination with this, and we'll see this a lot in the sports of like the tennis and the throwing sports, cricket, baseball, anything where we see a lot of rotator cuff tears, where people are using those tubing exercises, you'll often find a shoulder depression. All right, so, and you'll often find it on one side. So usually if it's a right-handed person, like a right-handed tennis player or a bowler in cricket, it's not uncommon to find that right side is like depressed more so. So there's a real asymmetry going on, and this asymmetry is a disaster to the entire body, because you will also likely find issues through the pelvic region. QLs, one tight QL, one weakened. There's a whole heap of things that really need to be addressed, other than just, you can see how pointless it is just to use a rotator cuff tubing exercise to resolve that. But this scapular depression really ruins any chance you have of providing stability to the joint here. And you will often see it from the front position, where this clavicle is almost dead horizontal, where it should have an angle riding down there to give space at the acromion here for the supraspinatus not to be torn. Anyone who presents with this type of shoulder thing, rotator cuff strengthening of these type of things are not a good idea. All right, they really need a lot of scapular retraining, and actually some upper trap strengthening to encourage better scapular rotation. All right, so at the end of the video I'll show you a couple of exercise examples of what I might use. But so the scapula is really the key. It's if the scapula is like restricted at all, or it's unstable, like it's sitting in anterior tilt instead of a posterior tilt, if it has reduced upward rotation, you are going to experience trouble with the shoulder. You're never going to be able to center that humeral head within the socket. So there's so many muscles that are working in combination. I've shown you a picture here of like how the serratus anterior is sort of pushing it upwards, lower trap pulling it down, and the upper trap pulling it up. These three guys are working together in combination with the rotator cuff to give you like that centration of the shoulder. You can see how it's so much more complicated than just trying to strengthen a couple of these guys. All right, so when you understand that the scapula is the key, and that's the first thing you want to really work on, the other stuff will come in combination. You may find you don't even need to worry about doing any of those external rotation exercises at all. So anterior humeral glide is where we'll find a lot of problems happening when, and this is where the rotator cuff things come into it. But if your scapula is sitting in anterior tilt, which I mentioned before, or downward rotation, even just a slight amount, then the supraspinatus is going to get rubbed, and it's going to, and at that manner, and once this constant gets friction, then you're going to get inflammation, and it swells, runs out of space, and then eventually you start getting tears. And then obviously pain is going to result after that. So even if there's just a little bit of laxity in the anterior shear, then this is going to be exacerbated if you start applying external rotation to it. And this is here's a better picture of the anterior humeral glides. This is where common you'll see these postural problems. So here's a good position here. So if you could imagine there's an X-ray and we can see the humeral head sitting right in the center here. If there's like stiffness and tightness through, say, the depressed sternum, you know, from tight abdominals, maybe the pecs, the lats, pulling the humeral head into internal rotation too far, it's not centered in the middle, so it should be sitting here instead of sitting there, and it's probably facing inwards instead of directly forwards. The muscles at the back here are working really hard to try and pull it back, and this is often where you'll find the trigger points kicking in. So and I'll put up here on the slide here for us. So this is often when you see 1/3 of the head of the humerus is sitting forward in the socket, and basically it's just altering the axis of rotation. So you'll never be able to keep it in the center no matter what movement you do. So let's say that that we had good humeral glide here and was sitting in the center, but we've identified that maybe you do need to strengthen through here, and there's not going to be that issue that we've discussed so far. The other thing you have to consider is that you may create rotator cuff fatigue. So if you do way too much, or especially apply too much load, you are going to cause short and tight external rotators, and now you're going to have exactly the problem that you didn't want. So you might have had something right and you just needed to work on your mobility. maybe you had nothing wrong, you're doing it as a preventative thing, and that preventative thing actually now is going to give you trouble. So you always got to understand you only need mild contractions of the rotator cuff for it to get its stability. It does not need to be fatigued like other muscles. These muscles are not designed the same way as the big powerful ones, so that as a result they don't need to be trained the same way. And I'll put here, research has sort of found fatigue of the rotator cuff muscle can cause as much as 2.5 millimeters of unwanted migration of the humeral head during abduction. So if they're fatigued, and this is also why you would never do these exercises at the beginning of a workout. You would never do these at the start of a workout. You would do them always towards the end, and just very light, and you would never take them into fatigue like failing point like you would try to do with chin-ups, push-ups and things like that. You don't want to fatigue these guys, all right, for the reasons that we've just discussed. All right, so what would I really be doing for exercises for rotator cuff instead of external rotation? Well, firstly, I'll be looking at getting rid of any flexibility muscle imbalances through pec minor, especially at the lats. These videos I've put here on the screen, you can look through the channel and find there's tons of stuff I've done on this before. This is just a couple of them. Thoracic mobility, I'd really be looking at that. I find thoracic mobility is a huge problem for shoulder dysfunctions. You're never going to achieve anything at the shoulder if thoracic mobility is compromised. So I'll be doing that very first. I'll be ruling that out. Then I'll be looking at scapular stability. Again, there's tons of exercises I may use. Probably one of my favourite ones is the wall slides, and there's several versions of those I may use depending on the person. Scapular stability in a single arm stance, push-ups, scapular protraction, anything that's sort of serratus anterior orientated. I'm going to be looking at doing all of these. I'm thinking all this stuff well before a tubing thing for the rotator cuff. It hasn't even entered my mind at this point. Then I'm really going to be looking at all the different things, pushing and pulling, getting posterior tilt of the scapula through deadlifting and things like that. Upward rotation, which is good on these sort of. So this is a great serratus anterior exercise, the cable push. This will give you my scapular retraction. This is also where I'm working my external rotators, as I mentioned before. Things like Turkish get-ups, where I've got stability in one place in a closed chain and then an open chain on the other side, in combination with thoracic mobility. Great exercise for controlling the centration of the humeral head here. Quite an advanced exercise, but these are the things that I'd be really looking at well before trying to implement just a rotator cuff isolated exercise. Now, in terms of other ways I might try and do it, as I'd be looking at the woodchop variations where I'm bringing in the leg drive in combination with the trunk and the shoulder. So not just isolating the shoulder, I'm trying to get the interaction through the legs, which is exactly how it was meant to work in the first place. I could be using a medicine ball like tornado balls and doing single arm stuff. This is really good for replicating the speed of and the timing of the throwing action as such. So a great way to really do it. Again, it's quite an advanced version, but has a lot more relevance to actually how the timing and positioning of how it is really used. So in summary, it's okay to use some of these external rotations, but if it's your go-to exercise and you're using it for no reason that it targets the rotator cuff muscles, you're going to be set up for trouble. So the shoulder's so dynamic and complex that you need much more intelligent and carefully structured plan to restore it back to normal if it's injured. And if you're not injured, you really should be just working on improving your movement through all the other things. For sure, if you're a baseball player or tennis player, you may use those external things to some degree, but I wouldn't be using it as the only thing. I'd be really looking at maintaining, like I said before, thoracic mobility, scapular stability, and just good movement through the other things. If I do that, I won't really need to use them as much as people think. And if you've got shoulder impingement, then you'll find that those exercises will just give you instant pain because that supraspinatus is already getting rubbed anyway, so there's no point in using them at all. So So I hope you found that this exercise was this video was useful, and if you want more information, check out the description under the video below, and there's a detailed report that has all of the assessments and tests and exercises in a step-by-step guide that I highly recommend if you do have shoulder pain. All right, and you can get that from the website by going to the links in the description below. All right, I'll hope you enjoyed that. We'll see you on our next video.